The security guard's hand came down hard on the little girl's shoulder, spinning her around before she could reach the glass doors of Maxwell Industries headquarters. "You again! I told you yesterday to stop coming here." His voice echoed across the marble plaza as dozens of well-dressed employees turned to stare. The girl stumbled, her worn sandals scraping against the polished stone, but she caught herself and stood tall despite her trembling legs. Her name was Maya, and at 12 years old, she had become familiar with rejection, but today felt different. Today felt like her last chance. The morning sun blazed overhead in Lagos, casting harsh shadows across her thin frame and highlighting the desperation in her eyes. She clutched a crumpled envelope containing her late father's school photographs, the only proof she had that might change everything. "Please, sir, just 1 minute with Mr. Davidson," Maya begged, her voice cracking with emotion that made several onlookers pause their morning routines. She had been coming to this towering building for 3 days straight, each time met with the same resistance, the same dismissive waves and threats to call the police. Her mother, Grace, lay in their one-room apartment across the city, her body ravaged by stage 3 cancer that spread like wildfire through her weakened system. The medical bills had piled up faster than Maya could count, reaching amounts that seemed impossible. 2 million naira for chemotherapy, another million for medications, and countless hospital fees that kept multiplying. Since her father died 7 years ago when she was just 5, her mother had worked 3 jobs to keep them alive, cleaning offices at night, selling food during the day, and doing laundry on weekends. "Security! Get this child out of here before she disturbs our clients," the guard shouted, and suddenly 2 more men in crisp uniforms approached from different directions. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized they might physically remove her, maybe even hurt her, but she couldn't give up, not when her mother had only weeks left according to Dr. Adeyemi. The envelope in her hand contained more than photographs. It held memories of her father, James Okonkwo, who her mother said had been brilliant, kind, and generous to everyone he met. Before he died in that terrible car accident, he had told her mother stories about his university days, about a struggling classmate he had helped with school fees, books, and even food, a young man named Richard Davidson who now stood at the top of this glass tower as one of Africa's youngest billionaires. The automatic door suddenly slid open, and a tall man in an expensive Navy suit stepped out, his phone pressed to his ear as he discussed stock prices and merger deals. Richard Davidson moved like someone who owned the world, his designer shoes clicking against the marble with confident rhythm, his presence commanding immediate respect from everyone in the vicinity. Maya knew him from the newspapers and television. At 39 years old, he had built a technology empire worth billions, owned companies across 6 African countries, and lived in a mansion that covered more land than her entire neighborhood. His eyes swept past her as if she were invisible, just another Lagos street child among thousands. But Maya did something that shocked everyone watching. She stepped directly into his path and dropped to her knees. "Mr. Davidson, please, my father was James Okonkwo, and he helped you when you had nothing." Richard Davidson stopped mid-stride, his phone call forgotten as those words hit him like a physical blow, and the entire plaza fell silent, waiting to see how Africa's most powerful young billionaire would respond to a desperate child's plea. The security guards froze, unsure whether to grab the girl or wait for instructions from their boss. Maya held up the envelope with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face as 7 years of pain, fear, and exhaustion poured out in that single moment. The morning sun seemed to intensify, making the scene feel even more dramatic, more impossible, more like a collision between 2 completely different worlds. Richard's expression remained unreadable, his dark eyes studying the crying child at his feet while his mind raced through memories he had buried deep. Memories of struggling through university, of nights without food, of a kind classmate who never asked for anything in return. If you want to know whether this billionaire remembers the debt he owes to a dead man, and if a 12-year-old girl's desperate gamble will pay off, keep watching. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this story will break your heart and put it back together. Next chapter is coming, and the secrets about to be revealed will change everything you think you know about mercy and justice. 20 minutes later, Maya sat in the most beautiful room she had ever seen, her dainty fingers nervously tracing patterns on the soft leather chair that probably cost more than her entire neighborhood. Richard Davidson's private office occupied the entire top floor of Maxwell Industries, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lagos's skyline, modern art pieces that Maya couldn't understand decorating pristine white walls, and furniture that looked like it belonged in a palace. She had stopped crying, but her eyes remained red and swollen, her throat raw from sobbing in the elevator as Richard's assistant, a kind woman named Kyoma, brought her up while the billionaire finished his interrupted phone call. The envelope lay open on Richard's massive desk between them, old photographs spread out showing two young men in university uniforms, arms around each other's shoulders, smiling at a future they couldn't predict. Maya watched Richard's face carefully, searching for any sign of recognition, any hint that a desperate plan had worked. James Okonkwo. Richard finally spoke, his deep voice filling the quiet office as he picked up one particular photograph that showed her father handing him what looked like money or documents. His hands trembled slightly, a crack in the billionaire's perfect armor that gave Maya her first real hope since this nightmare began. Your father saved my life more times than I can count. I came from a village so poor we shared one textbook among 15 students. When I got that scholarship to university, I thought my problems were over, but I had no money for accommodation, food, or books. He paused, setting down the photograph and meeting Maya's eyes with an intensity that made her sit up straighter. James found me sleeping in the library one night. Instead of reporting me, he brought me to his room, shared his meals, and even paid my hostel fees for 2 years when my scholarship ran out. Maya felt her heart soar with relief and gratitude, the tension that had gripped her body for days finally beginning to release its cruel hold. She wanted to speak, to thank him, to explain about her mother's cancer and the mounting medical bills, but Richard held up one hand to stop her. His expression shifted from nostalgic to something harder, more complicated, and Maya felt a brief moment of hope start to crumble. I paid him back, Richard said flatly, his businessman's mask sliding back into place as he leaned back in his executive chair. 10 years ago, when my first company went public, I sent your father a check for 5 million naira, every penny he spent on me plus interest. He cashed it. We're even. Maya, I owe your family nothing. The words landed like punches, each one destroying the fairy tale ending Maya had constructed in her desperate mind. But my mother is dying, Maya whispered, her voice so small it barely carried across the enormous desk that separated her from her only hope. She explained everything then, words tumbling out in a rush. How her mother had worked herself to exhaustion caring for Maya alone, how the cancer diagnosis came just 3 months ago, how they had already sold everything they owned including her father's watch and her mother's wedding ring. The doctors say she needs 2 million naira for chemotherapy immediately, or she has maybe 3 weeks left. I'm not asking for charity, Mr. Davidson. I'm asking for a job. I can clean your offices, wash cars, anything. I'll work every day after school. I just need enough money to save her. She saw something flicker in his eyes, maybe sympathy, maybe annoyance, but it disappeared before she could identify it clearly. Richard stood abruptly and walked to his massive windows, his back to Maya as he gazed out at the city he had conquered through pure ambition and ruthless business tactics. Your mother should have managed her finances better, he said, his tone cold and businesslike, the warmth from moments ago completely vanished. I built this empire from nothing because I made smart decisions and took responsibility for my life. I already fulfilled my obligation to your father. What happens to you and your mother now is not my problem. He pressed a button on his desk, and instantly Kyoma appeared at the door, her sympathetic expression confirming that she had been listening to the entire conversation. Kyoma, please escort this child out and inform security not to let her back in the building. Give her 5,000 naira for transport home and some food. Maya felt something inside her shatter completely, a final breaking point that transformed her grief into something much more dangerous, pure rage at the injustice of a world where good people died while cold billionaires thrived. She stood on shaking legs, ignoring Kyoma's gentle hand on her shoulder, and looked Richard Davidson directly in his eyes with a boldness that shocked even herself. My father made a mistake helping you, she said clearly, her young voice cutting through the office like a blade sharp enough to draw blood. He wasted his kindness on someone who forgot where he came from. I hope when you're old and dying, surrounded by all your money, you remember this moment. Remember the day you let his wife die when you could have saved her with pocket change. She turned and walked out with her head high, leaving the photograph scattered across his desk like accusations he couldn't ignore. Will Maya's words haunt a billionaire who thought he left his past behind? Can a 12-year-old girl's curse penetrate the walls of wealth and privilege? Subscribe and stay tuned for Chapter 3, where desperation drives Maya to a decision that will risk everything she has left. Drop a comment below if you think Richard deserves Maya's anger, or if he's right to protect his boundaries. The next chapter drops soon, and you won't believe what happens when Maya takes matters into her own small hands. Maya sat on the cold concrete floor of the hospital corridor at 2 a.m, her back pressed against the wall while exhausted nurses rushed past carrying supplies and charts. 3 days had passed since her confrontation with Richard Davidson. 3 days of watching her mother fade a little more each hour as the cancer consumed her from the inside out. Grace Okonkwo no longer looked like the strong woman who had raised Maya alone. Her skin had turned gray, her eyes sunken deep into her skull, and her breathing came in shallow gasps that sounded like death knocking on their door. The hospital had moved them to the charity ward, a crowded room with 20 beds separated only by thin curtains, where the smell of disinfectant mixed with suffering created an atmosphere of hopelessness. Maya had stopped going to school, stopped eating properly, stopped believing that miracles existed for poor people like them. Bed 14 needs to be cleared by morning. A nurse's voice drifted down the hallway, her tired tone suggesting this announcement happened frequently in this section of the hospital. Maya's body went rigid as she realized bed 14 was a mother's bed. They were giving up, preparing to send Grace home to die because Maya couldn't produce the money that might save her life. She had tried everything in 3 days, begging at church services where wealthy Lagosians threw pennies at her while filming themselves for social media, standing outside restaurants asking diners to spare their change, even attempting to approach other business owners with her father's story. Nothing worked because her story wasn't unique. Lagos had thousands of desperate children with dying parents, and people had learned to look away from suffering that became too familiar. The 5,000 Naira Richard's assistant had given her covered less than 1 hour of her mother's hospital stay. Maya made a decision then that would either save her mother or destroy what remained of her childhood innocence. She would steal the money she needed from the very man who refused to help her. The plan formed quickly in her exhausted mind, fueled by desperation and a kind of reckless courage that comes from having absolutely nothing left to lose. She remembered the layout of Richard Davidson's office, the expensive electronics scattered casually on shelves, the paintings that probably cost more than life-saving chemotherapy, and most importantly, she remembered seeing him enter security code into a wall panel that likely protected a safe. Maya had always been smart, her teachers constantly praising her sharp memory and quick thinking, but she had never imagined using those talents for crime. Yet here she was at midnight, planning to break into one of Africa's most secure buildings to rob one of its most powerful men. The next evening, Maya stood outside Maxwell Industries again, but this time she didn't approach the main entrance where guards would recognize and stop her. She had spent the entire day watching the building from across the street, studying patterns and routines with an intensity that surprised her. The cleaning crew arrived at 7 p.m. through a side service entrance, laughing and chatting in their identical uniforms as they prepared for their nightly shift. Maya waited until the last cleaner entered, then slipped in behind her, her small size and dark clothing helping her blend into shadows while her heart pounded so hard she thought everyone must hear it. Nobody challenged her as she made her way to the stairwell. Children were invisible in Lagos unless they were causing obvious trouble, and a quiet girl in worn clothes looked like she might be someone's daughter waiting for a parent to finish work. 23 floors felt like climbing a mountain as Maya forced her tired legs to keep moving upward, her lungs burning and her muscles screaming in protest. She passed a few maintenance workers who barely glanced at her, too focused on their own jobs to question a child's presence in the building. Richard's office floor remained dark and empty when Maya finally pushed through the stairwell door, her hand shaking so violently she could barely turn the handle. The space that had looked magical and intimidating 3 days ago now felt haunted, with Lagos's city lights casting strange shadows across expensive furniture and creating an atmosphere of being watched. Maya approached the wall panel she remembered, her fingers hovering over the keypad as she tried to recall the exact sequence Richard had entered, 8 digits that might be a birthday, anniversary, or random numbers only a billionaire would remember. She took a deep breath, started to enter her best guess, and suddenly every light in the office blazed on simultaneously while a voice behind her said, "Hello again, Maya." Has Maya just walked into a trap that will destroy her completely? Will Richard Davidson show mercy to a child caught stealing, or will he make an example of her that ruins any chance of saving her mother? Subscribe immediately and enable all notifications for Chapter 4, where everything Maya thought she knew about this billionaire gets turned upside down. Comment below whether you think Richard was testing her all along, or if this is going to end in tragedy. The next chapter, truth is darker and more complicated than anyone expected. Richard Davidson sat behind his desk in the same position Maya had seen 3 days earlier, but this time his expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, and his eyes held a weariness that made him look decades older. "I've been watching you on the security cameras since you entered the building," he said quietly, gesturing to monitors Maya hadn't noticed before, which displayed dozens of views from every floor and corridor. "I could have stopped you at the service entrance, or the stairwell, or any moment during your very long climb up here. Do you know why I didn't?" Maya stood frozen near the wall panel, her body preparing for police sirens, handcuffs, and the final destruction of any hope for her mother's survival. Her mind raced through terrible scenarios: jail for children, her mother dying alone, her father's memory tainted by his daughter becoming a criminal. Yet something in Richard's tone stopped her panic, a strange gentleness that didn't match his reputation or their previous encounter. "Because you wanted to see how far I would go," Maya answered, her voice surprisingly steady despite the terror coursing through her veins like ice water. "Because rich people like you enjoy watching poor people destroy themselves trying to survive." The words came out bitter and accusatory, carrying all the rage and exhaustion of a 12-year-old forced to grow up too fast. Richard didn't respond immediately. Instead, he pulled up something on his computer and turned the screen toward Maya. She saw hospital records, her mother's medical files, detailed financial statements showing every naira spent on treatment, and report from 3 different oncologists confirming that immediate chemotherapy offered a 60% survival chance. "I had my people investigate your story the day you left my office," Richard explained, his fingers drumming against the desk in a nervous rhythm that seemed out of character. "Everything you said was true. Your mother is dying, you have no money, and time is running out." Maya felt a surge of confused hope mixed with continued anger, unable to understand why someone who investigated a situation still refused to help. "Then why?" she demanded, taking a step toward the desk despite every instinct screaming at her to run before he changed his mind about calling security. "Why look into everything if you were just going to let her die anyway? Are you really that cruel, Mr. Davidson? Do you enjoy knowing you have the power to save someone but choosing not to?" Her questions hung in the air like accusations that couldn't be taken back, and for several long moments, Richard just stared at her with an expression Maya couldn't read. The city lights outside painted his face in alternating shadow and illumination, making him look almost haunted by demons Maya couldn't see. "Your father saved me. That's true," Richard finally said, standing and walking around the desk to sit on its edge, bringing himself closer to Maya's height in a gesture that felt deliberate. "But what I didn't tell you 3 days ago is that 6 months after I sent him that 5 million naira, your father came back asking for more money, said he had a business opportunity that needed investment, promised me triple returns within a year." Richard's voice grew harder, edges of old pain cutting through his businessman composure. "I gave him another 10 million naira because I trusted him, because I thought friendship meant something. He lost every penny in a failed construction project, and when I asked for my money back, he said we were brothers and brothers don't keep accounts. That betrayal taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. Never mix emotions with business, and never let guilt over past kindness cloud present judgment." The revelation hit Maya like a physical blow, reshaping everything she thought she knew about her father's relationship with this man. "That's a lie," Maya whispered, but her voice lacked conviction because pieces were starting to fit together in terrible ways. The argument between her parents she had overheard as a young child, her mother's bitter comments about bad business decisions, the way they had struggled financially even when her father was alive. Richard pulled out more documents from his desk drawer, showing contracts signed by James Okonkwo, bank transfers, and finally a letter where her father had written that Richard should consider the lost money payment for old debts of friendship. Maya's hand shook as she read her father's handwriting, seeing proof that the perfect man she had idealized might have been flawed in ways she never imagined. "He still helped you when you had nothing," Maya said desperately, clinging to the only argument she had left. "Whatever happened after doesn't erase that original kindness. My mother is paying for his mistakes, and she never asked you for anything." Richard's expression softened almost imperceptibly, and he pulled out his phone, dialing a number while maintaining eye contact with Maya. "Dr. Adeyemi, Richard Davidson. I'm authorizing full treatment for Grace Okonkwo, chemotherapy, medications, private room, whatever she needs. Yes, I'll cover everything personally, and I want your best oncologist on her case starting tomorrow morning." He ended the call and looked at Maya, who stood speechless, her legs suddenly weak with relief so overwhelming she thought she might collapse. "I'm not doing this because I owe your father anything," Richard said firmly, standing and returning to his professional distance. "I'm doing this because watching you try to rob me tonight reminded me of the desperate kid I used to be, the one who would have done anything to survive. Your mother starts treatment tomorrow, but you and I need to have a serious conversation about the future and what happens next. Will Richard's help come with conditions that Maya isn't prepared to accept? What price will this billionaire demand for saving Grace's life? Subscribe now and hit that notification bell for Chapter 5, the final chapter where shocking truths about Maya's father, Richard's real motives, and an unexpected twist will leave you speechless. Drop a like if this chapter gave you chills, and comment your predictions below. The conclusion is coming, and everything you think you know is about to be challenged. 6 months later, Maya stood in a completely transformed life that still felt surreal every morning when she woke up in a clean bed with full meals waiting downstairs. Her mother had survived. The chemotherapy worked. Grace was in remission, and they now lived in a modest but comfortable apartment in a safe neighborhood, courtesy of Richard Davidson's continued support. But the fairy tale ending came with complications Maya was still learning to navigate, responsibilities that sometimes felt heavier than the poverty she had escaped. Richard had offered her mother a management position at one of his companies, overseeing community outreach programs, while Maya received a full scholarship to one of Lagos's best private schools where her brilliant mind could finally flourish without the constraints of worry and hunger. Yet today, sitting in Richard's office again by invitation rather than desperation, Maya felt the same nervousness that had consumed her months ago during their first encounter. "I need to tell you something about your father that might change how you remember him," Richard began, his tone gentler than Maya had ever heard as he slid a folder across the desk toward her. Inside were letters, dozens of them written by James Okonkwo to Richard over the years, showing a correspondence Maya never knew existed. As she read through them, a more complete picture emerged of her father, a genuinely kind man who had indeed helped Richard selflessly at first, but who later struggled with pride and poor financial decisions that spiraled out of control. The letters showed James asking for advice, admitting mistakes, expressing shame at disappointing his family, and in the final letter written just weeks before his fatal accident, apologizing for taking advantage of their friendship and promising to make things right. "Your father wasn't a saint or a villain," Richard explained quietly. "He was just human, capable of both generosity and selfishness, just like the rest of us." Maya wiped away tears as she absorbed this more nuanced truth about the parent she had idealized through grief and childhood memories. "Why are you showing me this now?" she asked, carefully placing the letters back in the folder. Richard stood and walked to his window, the view showing a Lagos skyline where both poverty and prosperity coexisted in uncomfortable proximity, a physical representation of the complexity they were discussing. "Because I need you to understand that the money I gave your mother isn't just charity, and it isn't me finally paying off a debt," he said, turning to face Maya directly. "It's an investment in who you're going to become. Your father helped me when I was nothing, but he also taught me that handouts without purpose create dependency. You're brilliant, Maya, your teachers tell me you're exceptional in every subject, especially mathematics and problem solving. I'm offering you something more valuable than money. Richard explained his proposal with the same intensity he probably used in boardrooms negotiating billionaire deals. Maya would spend her summers and holidays working at Maxwell Industries, learning business from the ground up, understanding technology, finance, and leadership. You'll start in the mailroom, work your way through every department, and if you prove yourself as exceptional as I believe you are, I'll fund your university education at any school in the world that accepts you, Richard said, his eyes burning with an intensity that made Maya sit up straighter. But this isn't a gift, Maya. You'll work harder than you've ever worked before. You'll earn every opportunity through merit, not sympathy. I'm betting on you the same way your father once bet on me, except I'm going to make sure you learn the lessons he never did. That kindness without wisdom is wasted, and that real success comes from building something rather than just surviving. Maya felt emotion colliding inside her chest. Gratitude, determination, fear of failing, and excitement about possibilities she had never dared imagine during those desperate months of watching her mother die. What if I'm not as smart as everyone thinks? She asked quietly, voicing the insecurity that had haunted her since entering her new school where classmates had advantages she never possessed. Richard laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his usually serious face into something warmer and more accessible. Then you'll fail, learn from it, and try again. That's called life, Maya. But I don't think you will fail. You planned a heist on my building at 12 years old, showed more courage confronting me than most adults possess, and you're asking intelligent questions instead of just taking what's offered. Your father gave me a chance when nobody else would. I'm giving you the tools to build something he never could. Don't waste it. As Maya left Richard's office that evening, walking past the same security guard who had tried to remove her months earlier, guard who now greeted her with respect and warm smiles, she thought about the strange journey from desperation to hope. Her mother was alive and strong again, working in a job that gave her purpose beyond just survival. Maya herself had transformed from a street child begging for scraps into a student with opportunities that once seemed impossible. Yet the biggest change was understanding that life contained more complexity than the simple stories of heroes and villains she had believed as a desperate 12-year-old. Richard Davidson was neither the heartless monster she had first judged him to be nor a perfect savior. He was simply a man trying to balance the debts of his past with the realities of his present. And Maya was no longer just a poor girl with a tragic story. She was becoming someone who could write her own ending, someone who would honor both her father's kindness and learn from his mistakes. The city lights of Lagos spread out before her as she walked home, each light representing a story as complicated as her own, and for the first time since her father's death 7 years ago, Maya felt genuinely excited about the future. Thank you for staying with Maya's incredible journey from desperate poverty to hope and opportunity. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel for more emotional, life-changing stories that remind us why kindness matters even in complicated circumstances. Like this video if you believe in second chances and the power of mentorship. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that endings can be rewritten even when things seem impossibly dark. Drop a comment below telling us what lesson hit you hardest. Was it about complicated family legacies, the responsibility that comes with wealth, or the courage it takes for a child to fight for survival? Turn on all notifications because next week we're bringing you another powerful African story about resilience, betrayal, and redemption that you absolutely cannot miss. Remember, every wealthy person's story started somewhere, and every struggling person deserves a chance to prove what they can become. Until next time, keep believing in the power of human connection, keep fighting for the people you love, and never forget that your story isn't over until you decide it is. God bless you all.